Next, I want to welcome Derek Hanson to talk to you about the words phishing-resistant and where we need to be going with that in the future. Please help me welcome Derek.
So I will say that was a very tough keynote to follow because Mike is way cooler than I ever think I could hope to be. So I thank you, Authenticate, for a chance to be here to talk with you all about stuff that we've dug into this week to understand what it means to talk about passkeys. What is FIDO authentication? What is the core of what we're doing? This has been an opportunity for us to focus on what that future is going to be. We heard great presentations this week all about organizations that were making passkeys available for their customers. And they are on a journey of taking it through passkeys and phishing-resistant authentication through their entire group of users that access their services, not just their employees. But all of them have faced the same challenges that we all face today, which is what are we going to do to get rid of phishing in our business? Our enterprises are under constant attack. We've been talking about phishing resistance and its opportunity to change things for many years, but we are on that precipice of actually making some change. So when we start talking about change and how do we make change, one of the greatest things I get to do in my job is listen to our customers who have had some successes and some failures and learn some lessons along the way. And one of the things that I'm here to share today with you is how I have seen multiple organizations actually go through and remove the risk of phishing attacks in their organization. So when we talk about removing risk, what does that actually mean to a business? What would it mean if I could just wipe out the source of so many cyber attacks that are happening in my organization? Almost everyone would sign up for it, but we actually have to talk through what that means. And so today, I myself am going to take a little bit of a risk. I'm going to break the cardinal rule of keynotes. I'm going to try and deliver two messages at the same time. But there are two messages targeting for two different people. Some of you, the message is for why do you need to invest in removing the risk? And others, I'm hoping to land the message of how. We can talk about removing risk, but if we don't know how to go back and carry the story to those in our organizations that actually need to understand what it means to change the business to remove this risk, we won't get the buy-in that's necessary. The stories that I have heard and have been told time and time again were great successes, but they did not come without a lot of effort. And so when we start talking about removing risk, we are starting to look at it through a slightly different lens than just did we roll out phishing-resistant authentication. It's how did we actually change the business and the enterprise? And the way we look at that is actually through a different lens than just hey, did you authenticate securely? We're starting to look at that through the lens of the user. Is that user in a state where their entire life cycle is phishing resistant? Are their onboarding processes still subject to old, phishable, attackable processes? What happens when you call the help desk and you need to recover? Are those processes secure? We had a great opportunity to hear from one of our customers who had rolled out FIDO to their entire business-to-business banking line. And when they rolled it out, they saw an immediate, complete stop of account takeovers. 0 account takeovers for 11 months, no problems, no risks. Then all of a sudden, something weird started to happen. The call centers started getting phone calls. And when they went back and listened to those phone calls, they could hear somebody playing the literal man in the middle on that phone call. The help desk would ask the person a question, and you could hear the person on the call relay the question on the other side to who they were talking to. We talk about man-in-the-middle attacks here a lot of times because that's the result of phishing, but they work on legacy technology. This is where it's come from, okay? If I control the message, I can control who's being talked to. And we're seeing this lens of users start to creep in to other areas as we evaluate security systems. And the latest edition of NIST 863 starts to talk a little bit about users when they start to combine what is the recovery context with what is the authentication credential that has been issued. The point being, if I've given you a very secure method to sign in, and I gave you a password on a sticky note to recover access, that's going to be where the system falls down. We need to remove phishing from the end-to-end life cycle for all the users. And that is how we can actually transform business to remove risk. So the ugly truth of it is, as a vendor working very hard to promote phishing-resistant authentication, it's not enough. Phishing-resistant authentication is table stakes. What we are discussing is not a tool in the toolbox, but a change to how you do business. And a change to how you do business is involving more executives than just your CISO or CIO that you work for. We are involving the HR team. How do we onboard people? We're involving legal. If we're going to go after all of our users, we are going to have to look at our vendor and supplier contracts. How do we onboard our new suppliers when those things are renewed? Because it's a change of business. To remove risk has, every time that we've seen it successful at scale, it took a business decision that this was a risk they were ready to wipe off the board. And it takes that focus, and it takes that discipline to actually make sure that you are successful with this product or project. Removing risk when it's business change is very different than just changing technology. So let's talk a little bit about how do you get to a place where you have what we call a phishing-resistant user. What is a phishing-resistant user and how is it made? Well, simple. You first get rid of all the passwords and everything that's phishable. Okay? Super easy to say, but the reality is when we start talking about getting rid of the passwords, in many of our organizations, that's reducing credentials. We have lots of generations of IAM products deployed. We have isolated systems that were never connected to SSO. We have those legacy applications that we still don't know what we're doing with them, but they're hanging around and they have that password that's been copied from one directory to another. We need to start to reduce credentials in all of our organizations. And when we reduce credentials, we are reducing our footprint for phishing. The cost of legacy enterprise deployments is that we are stuck with a myriad of technology generations inside of our businesses. And they have a very serious impediment on our ability to move forward. So the next way that you can actually reduce credentials is make sure you're federating. In this day and age, I'm sure that sounds really simple. You know, you've got single sign-on, it feels like table stakes. But time and time again, I have talked with customers that the biggest value that they needed was to get a FIDO identity provider that supported passkeys and actually use it. Multiple organizations I've talked to had 4 different actual cloud-based identity provider solutions. Like, I don't understand how you hope to ever corral the problem of phishing when you're trying to unify business process. And the reason I keep talking about business process is if you don't fix the business process, users will never know where to go or what to do because every application is different. These are the basic blocking and tackling pieces. This is the risk I'm taking of giving you some of the how, but not trying to lose the why. The next key place here is replace the credentials. We've talked about how do you get credentials in people's hands. You need to have a blended strategy in an enterprise for how are you going to onboard users, how are you going to allow users to exercise synced credentials, and how are you going to let users exercise a whole new paradigm of risk that has evolved in identity. This paradigm comes with the fact that there are new identity events that have been created when we started using synced passkeys and password managers. The first time you sign into a browser to bring your user profile to that device. The first time you sign into your device and enroll it in MDM. All of these scenarios are new situations where users are actually bringing your credentials to devices that you may have never intended. So we need to make sure that we have a strategy that enables those to be used securely, but also when things hit the fan, they have a solution for falling back. One of the things we talk a lot about, I actually heard it in 2 talks today, the conversation of what do you do when users lose their passkeys? And I heard 2 different answers. One was the classic FIDO answer, which was you make sure they have 2 security keys and one's locked up, and the other is use synced passkeys. I'm here to tell you that those arguments are the moral equivalent of each other. Synced passkeys are not an account recovery solution as much as they are making sure that it's a highly available credential. You want to make sure that users aren't locked out, that they're able to sign in so they have the right experience, but synced passkeys are the moral equivalent of buy another YubiKey because you're trying to make sure you have credentials so you don't hit lockout. So what happens when we hit lockout? What do? Well, we need those processes. If anything, backstage, trying to make sure I was in the right headspace to come out here, listening to Mike talk about AI and all the future of AI, we should all be very concerned about what our account recovery processes look like. Because now what is the future going to be? Can we trust those remote signals that we have built all of our processes on? And that's going to evolve. So we're going to need solutions that blend both in-person and remote recovery options. The idea by having both devices, or device-bound and synced passkeys so that your users have available solutions to sign in, is we never want to actually hit account lockout. If you get into the account lockout state, it's okay in an enterprise setting to find the right amount of pain. Because if we've done this correctly, we've removed all the other risk from authentication. So attacks will focus on account recovery because that will become the newest, lowest hanging fruit from an authentication perspective. Finally, I want to talk in this section about making a phishing-resistant user. You actually need to empower the users. Give them the self-service tools where possible. If they can sign in securely to register access to those user profiles, to sync their passkeys to that device, enroll in MDM, you're actually reducing the cost and the friction for them to just get back to working. No user wants to think about where are all their passkeys when they're trying to get a new device set up. They're sitting there trying to figure out how to get to my email. They want to actually be productive, and we get in the way. But part of this is we actually also need to make sure that we're working with all the business. What's HR doing to onboard? How can you simplify the HR onboarding process? Where can we inject the issuance of the credential so it's bound to the identity so that if we get into a recovery state, we have a clean plan? So I'm going to step back up, get out of the weeds a little bit, and we're going to come back and talk about the fact that from our perspective, phishing-resistant users are just the first step. They're a key step. You need to make sure that you can make a phishing-resistant user, but if you're going to protect the organization, a single phishing-resistant user isn't all that helpful. We have for years worked on a paradigm where we were going to protect the keys of the kingdom because we were trying to protect those privileged admins, those privileged users, because that was the easiest box that we could draw around this risk. The reality is phishing isn't looking for the most attractive target. They're looking for any vulnerable target so that they can get a foothold. And once they have a foothold, then bad things can start to happen. So the reality for a phishing scenario, and why we talk about phishing-resistant users, is every user in the enterprise needs to go through this transition to become a phishing-resistant user. One of the most successful projects I have seen with one of the organizations that we work with has deployed FIDO authentication per board mandate. And they report back to the board any time that they fall below 80% of their user population not using FIDO-only authentication. The board took it as a serious risk, mandated to senior leadership in this organization that they were going to go wall to wall with phishing-resistant authentication because phishing was a massive organizational risk that they wished to remove. So I'm here to say that what we're working on with all of you is that we can get to a solution for all users anywhere in the enterprise. So as we look at what does that mean, there's a very clear and repeatable pattern that we've seen for people deploying these solutions internally. But it requires a changing of the mindset. We have to embrace the fact that all users have to be protected, not just some. We need to actually make sure that this technology works, and that's the work that we're doing here on the Standrds side that I think is so important. How do I get to a new device? What is my experience when I move my credentials to a new device? Those things matter. How do I securely prove I am whom I am when I'm stepping onto this new device? Is that the credentials that I'm carrying with me? All of these things have to work together to create a holistic solution where you have enabled every user with basically a digital janitor type situation, where they have all the keys available at all the times to unlock any of the doors that they need to do the job securely. Finally, the last thing I will say on this is some of you need to carry a very bold message back into your organization that what you have that you think is good enough is not good enough. I'm advising that you don't make any career limiting moves in this situation, but at the same time, I am stating that this is the reality. There were so many talks this week that talked about how prevalent phishing is and what the risks are. I'm not going to cover the stats for you. You've probably heard them ad nauseum. But the reality of it is you are becoming, if you're still working, holding out hope that OTPs are going to save you in your productivity environments, you are becoming the slowest person in the race to avoid the bear. Okay? You do not want to be the slowest people out there. Let's go ahead and protect ourselves. Part of that is changing process. In it, you have a very specific set of processes that you need to look at. How do I onboard new employees? What do I do with existing employees? The business process is what actually makes this stick. We've been doing passwords for 60 years. Our businesses have processes built around passwords we haven't even thought about. One of the customers was in manufacturing, and they signed the movements of product from one stage to the other by having the user sign in with their password. So all the ERP systems were built around the fact that I have a password to move product from one stage to the next. This is business process change much more than it's technology. All the other talks this week have told you how much faster it is, how much better and more secure it is. But when we focus on usability and we focus on accessibility and we're talking about business process change, you're actually going to make your coworkers' lives better. It's not often that we get to do that. We talk a lot about it from the consumer side, but if your work life sucks a little bit less, that's kind of a big win. So let's talk about, again, the patterns and how they've worked out in a process. First, I highly recommend that you get that executive alignment. You have senior leadership because it will stall out, and the only thing that's going to prevent what you're doing from becoming yet another partially completed project is that executive alignment. If you don't have people on board when HR is not applying the resources for changing business process, you're going to come to a stalemate. So you need the most senior leadership conversations to be able to agree that this is a risk worth removing and worth prioritizing. Next, as you go into that prepare phase, make sure you've documented. One of the key things of success that we've seen is documenting what the processes are, where to find it. And it's not necessarily for the users. That could be for the help desks. That could be for the managers. That could be for the people operating the security offices in your building. They need to know what happens when you lose your devices. How do I onboard you? How do I verify you? Then next is we actually get to a spot where we're making a successful change. We are at that new beginning. We're starting to cut over our onboarding processes. We make sure that for those users that are coming in, we're not creating more passwords, we're not adding to the legacy tech debt, but we are actually moving forward. Then comes the long effort of converting existing users. This is the hardest part because the existing users have access to applications that will be part of what we will call the long tail here in a moment. So after you start to enable users with that phishing-resistant authentication, now you get to finally close the chapter for these user populations, one user at a time. We get to enforce. We get to remove phishable authentication. We get to now see the benefits of getting rid of phishing from the account lifecycle. And that is actually how we get to a point where you are taking one phishing-resistant user at a time to build a phishing-resistant enterprise. It is a burn down chart. This is not super amazing stuff. It is just process. I do believe that most of what we do in identity is plumbing and electrical. We have to make sure that the systems run right in the way they expect. So sometimes we get into these projects and we're like, oh, that's not obvious. But if you go in and put the lock on the door and actually remember to lock it, then you've achieved success. That's kind of where we're at. We are talking about basic plumbing of how our businesses are operating. And so finally, I'll talk a little bit about the long tail. The long tail is often the reason why people don't start. It's this business application I can't move. It's this system that is still tied to an old legacy set of controls. It's this critical application or my OT environment, and we let perfect get in the way of progress. We've done that a little bit as an industry where we've stalled on some of how we make this technology work together because we're working for perfect. We need to make progress. So I really hope that in this final session here, I haven't actually put you to sleep because I know this is day 3 of a very long week and it's post-party, but I do want to leave you with the thought that phishing-resistant users are the future for your organization. You need to be looking at how do I take everyone in my organization, or at least as many people as possible, through this funnel of getting rid of passwords and making every user phishing resistant. So with that, thank you, and it's been a wonderful week, Authenticate.